Today is Sunday, February 22nd, 2026, and we stand at the precipice of what may be remembered as one of the most profound financial dislocations in modern history. The global financial architecture, that complex web of interconnected markets, central bank policies, and currency relationships that has underpinned economic stability for decades, is quietly yet irreversibly bleeding out over this seemingly ordinary weekend. While millions of people across the globe go about their daily routines, enjoying family time, engaging in recreational activities, or simply resting, utterly oblivious to the seismic tremors currently fracturing the very foundation of the credit markets, institutional capital is silently and desperately repositioning itself for what promises to be a tumultuous reckoning when the Asian exchanges open tomorrow night. The signs are everywhere for those trained to see them. Look carefully past the sanitized headlines carefully crafted by public relations departments, past the comforting rhetoric delivered by central bank officials in their measured tones, and examine instead the raw mathematical reality of the bond markets. Study the violent dislocations occurring in currency pairs that have remained stable for years. Observe the silent yet relentless draining of physical commodity vaults worldwide, a phenomenon that speaks volumes about what sophisticated investors truly believe is coming. If you are watching this presentation, if you have taken the time to seek out alternative perspectives on the current financial situation, you already sense deep in your gut that something has fundamentally broken in the system. Your instincts are not deceiving you. You are absolutely right. Hello everyone, I am John A.G., and welcome back to Dark Macro, where we cut through the noise and examine the unvarnished truth about macroeconomic trends that will shape your financial future. Before we methodically unpack the precise anatomy of the crisis unfolding before us in real time, and before we discuss the concrete strategies for how you can intelligently position yourself for the violent repricing of reality that is now inevitable, I want to strongly encourage you to subscribe to this channel and join my exclusive WhatsApp group. This private community provides real-time, unfiltered macroeconomic intelligence that you simply cannot find in mainstream financial media. The window for adequate preparation is closing rapidly with each passing hour, and in a market moving this fast, with liquidity evaporating and volatility exploding, you absolutely cannot afford to rely on delayed mainstream feeds that are often hours or even days behind the actual market developments. You need to be on the inside, interpreting the data as it prints, understanding the implications before the crowd reacts. To truly understand the staggering magnitude of what is about to unfold this Sunday and in the weeks that follow, you must first strip away the comfortable illusions you have been systematically taught about modern money throughout your education and professional life. For decades, nearly 5 decades since the final severance of the dollar's link to gold in 1971, the global monetary system has functioned as a beautifully engineered mirage, an elaborate confidence game that has worked precisely because enough people believed in it. It has been a regime where unlimited paper derivatives, created with keystrokes on computer screens, have dictated the perceived value of finite physical reality. We have lived through what historians will undoubtedly recognize as the greatest debt supercycle in all of human history, an unprecedented era where prosperity was not laboriously mined from the earth, carefully manufactured through productive enterprise, or patiently saved and accumulated over generations, but was instead simply printed into existence by unelected technocrats pressing buttons on keyboards in the ornate headquarters of central banks. We were told repeatedly by academic economists, by financial media personalities, and by government officials that sovereign debt did not fundamentally matter, that a nation could never truly go bankrupt in its own currency. We were assured that central banks, armed with sophisticated models and unprecedented powers, could permanently outlaw the natural business cycle that has characterized economic activity throughout human history. We were convinced that complex financial engineering, the exotic derivatives, the algorithmic high-frequency trading systems, the structured products with bewildering acronyms, had somehow transcended and replaced the need for actual tangible capital backing the financial system. But the escalating economic crises of 2026, which have been building with increasing intensity throughout the past 18 months, have permanently shattered that comfortable paradigm, brutally exposing the terrifying fragility of a world built entirely on unbacked promises and mathematical abstractions. The emperor, as it turns out, has no clothes, and an increasing number of market participants are beginning to notice this uncomfortable reality. Consider carefully the macroeconomic trap we are currently navigating, a situation with no easy exits and no painless solutions. Sovereign debt yields across developed economies have hit what can only be described as terminal velocity. The United States, along with the broader G7 coalition of advanced economies, has definitively crossed the Rubicon of fiscal sustainability, that point of no return where the mathematics of debt accumulation become inexorable and self-reinforcing. When the annual interest payments on the national debt exceed the entire defense budget of the world's preeminent military power, and when new debt must continuously be issued merely to pay the interest on the old debt rather than to fund any actual government services or investment, you have entered what mathematicians would recognize as a death spiral, a feedback loop from which there is no escape within the current framework. Simultaneously, sticky structural inflation, the persistent kind that is embedded in wages, rental contracts, and cost structures, rather than the transitory kind that quickly reverses, has trapped central banks in what can only be described as a catastrophic doom loop with no good options remaining. If central bankers raise interest rates aggressively to fight inflation and restore price stability, they inevitably bankrupt their own governments by making debt service impossibly expensive. They collapse the commercial real estate sector that is already teetering on the edge with record vacancy rates and underwater mortgages, and they trigger a cascade of corporate defaults. If instead they lower rates to save the banking system and provide relief to borrowers, they ignite a hyperinflationary inferno that destroys the purchasing power of the working class and erodes the savings of the middle class, ultimately leading to social instability and political upheaval. They have painted themselves into a corner. They have exhausted their ammunition. They have no moves left on the chessboard that do not result in checkmate. The comforting illusion of omnipotent central bank control that has characterized the post-2008 era has finally and completely evaporated, leaving behind only the harsh reality that monetary policy cannot solve problems that are fundamentally fiscal and structural in nature. Alongside this domestic fiscal nightmare, we are simultaneously witnessing the rapid and relentless weaponization of fiat currencies on the global geopolitical stage. The aggressive use of financial sanctions, the freezing of foreign reserves, and the weaponization of the SWIFT payment system over the last several years have taught the Eastern Hemisphere, China, Russia, India, and their aligned nations, a brutal and unforgettable lesson about the dangers of holding wealth in someone else's currency. The lesson is simple but profound. If you do not physically hold it, if it exists merely as digits in a computer system controlled by a potentially hostile foreign power, you do not truly own it, and it can be confiscated or frozen at any moment for political reasons. We have reached both the mathematical and psychological exhaustion point of the modern monetary experiment. In this environment of fiscal dominance, where the needs of the government debt market override all other considerations, and geopolitical panic, where nations fear being cut off from the dollar system, central banks and sovereign wealth funds are no longer primarily seeking yield or investment returns. They are seeking survival. They are seeking assets that cannot be hacked, frozen, or confiscated. Capital is violently rotating out of abstract counterparty risks, the financial instruments that depend on someone else's promise to pay, and seeking immediate refuge in absolute tangible wealth, in assets that have intrinsic value regardless of anyone's promise. This brings us directly to what I believe is the most asymmetrically mispriced asset on the entire planet, the quiet titan of the physical world that has been overlooked, dismissed, and systematically suppressed for decades: silver. To the uninitiated investor, to those who have absorbed their financial education from mainstream sources, silver is just a shiny metal, a secondary afterthought compared to its more glamorous cousin gold, or an antiquated relic of a bygone monetary era that has no place in a modern digital economy. But if you truly understand the underlying physics, if you comprehend the critical role silver plays in industrial supply chains, and if you grasp the dark mechanics of the commodities futures markets and how they have been manipulated, you know that silver is actually the Achilles heel of the entire global financial system, the weak point where the contradictions of the paper money system are most acutely concentrated. For decades, really since the abandonment of the gold standard and the subsequent demonetization of silver, the true value of silver has been artificially suppressed by an elaborate fractional reserve paper market. The COMEX exchange in New York and the LBMA in London have operated a system where billions upon billions of dollars in digital contracts, derivatives, futures, options, and unallocated accounts are traded daily in massive volume. But these contracts are backed by only a vanishingly small fraction of actual physical bullion sitting in registered vaults. It is a fractional reserve system not unlike fractional reserve banking, where the institutions are making promises they cannot simultaneously keep to all claimants. The price of silver that you see quoted on financial websites and television screens has not been genuinely discovered by the natural laws of physical supply and demand in the way that economic textbooks describe price formation. Instead, It has been dictated and carefully managed by the infinite issuance of paper contracts, a system deliberately designed to manage market sentiment and protect the fiat currency illusion from the discipline that physical commodities would otherwise impose. This system of hypothecation, pledging the same collateral to multiple parties, and rehypothecation, repledging that already pledged collateral, has allowed bullion banks to short the market with impunity, creating an artificial abundance on paper that kept the price of physical reality artificially suppressed far below what supply and demand fundamentals would otherwise dictate. But this sophisticated paper game requires one absolutely fundamental condition to survive and continue functioning. The participants must never demand physical delivery in significant size. They must continually roll their paper contracts over at expiration, satisfied with a fiat cash settlement that compensates them for price movements but never results in actual metal changing hands. As long as the vast majority of market participants were content to trade paper claims and accept cash settlements, the system could maintain the illusion of abundant supply and price stability. As we sit here today on February 22, 2026, that suppression mechanism is collapsing in real time, unraveling with a speed that has caught even seasoned market observers off guard. The essential trust that underpinned the paper market has broken down irreparably. The paper leverage, the ratio of paper claims to physical metal, has expanded to a point of mathematical absurdity, with some analysts estimating ratios exceeding 100.1 or even higher. And the smart money, the sophisticated institutional investors and sovereign entities, have finally realized the profound implications. There are potentially 100 or more claims for every single ounce of physical metal actually available for delivery. We are witnessing a historic and uncontainable run on physical silver, a phenomenon that bears eerie similarities to classic bank runs, but is occurring in the commodity markets. Sovereign wealth funds managing hundreds of billions in assets, ultra-high net worth family offices, and forward-thinking tech conglomerates are no longer passively rolling over their contracts at expiration as they have done for years. They are standing for delivery. They are calling the bluff of the exchanges, demanding that the paper promises accumulated in their accounts be converted into actual cast bars of 1,000-ounce silver that can be shipped to their own secure storage facilities. And the vaults are hemorrhaging inventory at a rate that is mathematically terrifying for the short sellers who are contractually obligated to deliver metal they do not possess. Let me walk you through the structural nightmare on the supply side in detail, because this is where the investment thesis becomes truly undeniable and where the laws of physics trump the manipulations of paper markets. Global mine production of silver peaked nearly a decade ago, despite high prices and strong incentives to increase production. We have spent the years since high-grading the existing mines, extracting the richest and most concentrated ore bodies first, while leaving lower-grade deposits for later, essentially exhausting the easiest and most economical sources. The capital expenditure required to bring new primary silver mines online. We're talking about billions of dollars in infrastructure, including roads, power supplies, processing facilities, and tailings management, has been systematically starved by a decade of ESG mandates, environmental regulations, and artificially suppressed prices that made new projects economically unviable. Here is a crucial truth that the paper markets cannot circumvent. You cannot print a silver mine into existence. Unlike fiat currency that can be created with a keystroke, a new silver mine requires 10 to 15 years of permitting battles, exploratory drilling, metallurgical testing, environmental impact assessments, infrastructure construction, and billions in upfront capital before the first ounce of metal is produced. The mining industry operates on geological reality, not financial fantasy. As a direct result of this underinvestment, global primary silver supply has largely flatlined in the range of approximately 800 to 850 million ounces annually, with only marginal increases possible from existing operations. Yet while supply has stagnated at these levels despite rising prices, consumption has violently decoupled from historical norms and accelerated dramatically. We are not experiencing a minor, temporary deficit that can be easily corrected. We are entering our sixth consecutive year of a massive structural global supply deficit, where annual consumption exceeds annual production by a significant margin, relentlessly drawing down above-ground reserves and inventories at a pace that simply cannot be sustained without a dramatic price adjustment to either ration demand or incentivize new supply. This accelerating deficit is being driven by a profound transformation in human infrastructure and technology that has fundamentally altered silver's role in the global economy. Silver is not just another commodity, it is the most electrically conductive, thermally conductive, and reflective element on the entire periodic table. These superlative physical properties, which cannot be replicated by substitutes in many applications, make silver the uncompromising bottleneck of modern technology and the indispensable ingredient in the civilization we are building. The explosive and price-inelastic demands of the 2026 technology economy are devouring this metal at an unprecedented rate. Look carefully at the artificial intelligence revolution that is transforming every sector of the economy. The massive exascale data centers required to train and run the next generation of neural networks, and large language models consume staggering amounts of electrical power. Some individual facilities draw as much power as a small city. Their complex cooling systems, which must dissipate enormous heat loads, and their advanced microprocessors with ever-shrinking transistors, rely heavily on silver components for optimal thermal and electrical performance. Every incremental advance in AI computing power translates directly into increased silver consumption. Look at the electrification of the global energy grid, the massive rollout of advanced solar photovoltaics as nations pursue renewable energy mandates, and the governmental requirements for electric vehicle adoption. Every single electric vehicle requires substantially more silver than a traditional internal combustion engine. We're talking about 2 to 3 times as much silver per vehicle for the electric motors, battery management systems, and power electronics. As EV adoption accelerates globally, this represents a structural demand increase of enormous magnitude. Look at the defense sector, which has become increasingly active given rising geopolitical tensions. The advanced guidance systems in hypersonic missiles traveling at 5 times the speed of sound, the sophisticated radar capabilities of next-generation fighter jets, the satellite arrays being deployed in low Earth orbit for communication and surveillance, all absolutely depend on the unique physical properties of silver. These mission-critical applications have no substitute materials that can provide the required performance. These industries do not care what the price of silver is within a reasonable range. They need it to build their products and maintain their technological edge, and they will pay whatever the market demands to secure supply. They are price-inelastic buyers, and they are competing for access to a rapidly shrinking pool of physical metal against a global investor class that is simultaneously waking up to the systematic devaluation of their paper currency. When you combine this relentless industrial consumption with a massive surge in global physical investment demand from both institutions and individuals, the mathematics of the market breaks down entirely. The Eastern central banks, particularly those of China, Russia, India, and other nations seeking to reduce dollar dependency, have spent the last 3 years systematically hoarding gold to diversify away from the weaponized dollar system and build reserve assets that cannot be frozen by Western sanctions. But that physical accumulation of monetary metals is now violently cascading down the periodic table into silver, as investors recognize that silver is dramatically undervalued relative to gold by historical standards. We are seeing new protectionist policies emerge with increasing frequency as resource-rich nations realize that exporting their physical commodities, their tangible wealth, in exchange for depreciating paper currency is ultimately a fool's errand that impoverishes them over time. Export restrictions, licensing regimes, and outright bans are tightening the physical market even further, restricting the flow of bullion to the Western exchanges, just as the demand for physical delivery skyrockets. What was once a globally fluid market is becoming increasingly balkanized along geopolitical lines. Silver is no longer merely viewed as an industrial input or a speculative trading vehicle. It has been aggressively and undeniably reclassified as a Tier 1 monetary asset in a world that is desperately running out of hard money, out of assets that store value independently of any government's fiscal policy. The cognitive dissonance in the mainstream financial media is absolutely staggering to observe. They will talk to you endlessly about the latest technology company earnings reports, the quarterly GDP revisions and what they mean for interest rate policy, and the subtle nuances of the Federal Reserve's dot plot projections, all while completely ignoring the massive geological and monetary crisis unfolding directly beneath their feet. They cannot or will not comprehend a market paradigm where counterparty risk, the risk that the entity on the other side of your transaction cannot fulfill their obligations, is the ultimate danger, and where physical possession is the only true measure of wealth rather than a portfolio statement showing digital account balances. But the institutional insiders, the ones managing billions in assets and whose careers depend on getting this right, know the truth. The bullion banks that have been naked shorting this market for decades, selling metal they did not own or have access to, are currently trapped in what may be the most dangerous short squeeze in financial history. They are desperately trying to source physical metal in a market that has virtually none available to give at current prices. They are chartering cargo planes to fly pallets of silver across the globe at enormous expense, draining silver ETF inventories by redeeming shares for physical bars and quietly borrowing from sovereign reserves just to meet immediate delivery requirements and avoid a default that would expose the fraudulent nature of the paper market. But the fundamental mathematics has finally caught up with them after decades of manipulation. The fractional reserve illusion is being dragged out into the harsh sunlight of physical reality, where the laws of supply and demand cannot be indefinitely suspended. Which is exactly why tomorrow, this Sunday, is the moment that silver investors have been patiently waiting for through years of frustration. As we stand on the precipice of the critical late February delivery windows on the futures exchanges, tomorrow is not a day of rest, not a sleepy Sunday where nothing significant happens. It is the deep breath before the plunge, the final quiet hours before the global exchanges are forced to reconcile the mathematical impossibility of their paper derivatives against an unforgiving physical shortage that cannot be wished away or papered over. When the Asian markets open Sunday night in their time zones, they will be pricing in a fundamentally different world. A world where the vaults are being rapidly depleted, where geopolitical tensions are boiling over into open conflict, and where fiat currencies are melting down against tangible assets. The paper derivatives that once controlled the narrative and suppressed prices are collapsing under the sheer weight of physical demand that cannot be satisfied. And the panic for tangible assets, for things you can touch and hold outside the banking system, is just beginning to ripple through the broader institutional class as more investors recognize the precarious situation. For the silver investor who has endured years of price manipulation, who has been gaslit by the financial establishment and told they were conspiracy theorists or economic illiterates, who has suffered through agonizing price suppression despite deteriorating fundamentals, this weekend represents the ultimate vindication of your analysis and patience. You saw the mathematical reality when no one else would even look at the data. You understood the critical difference between price, what something trades for in a manipulated paper market, and value, what something is actually worth based on its utility and scarcity. You recognized early on that a system based on infinite debt and infinite money printing could not indefinitely survive against the hard constraint of finite physical resources. The pain of watching manipulated paper smashes on the COMEX, those sudden violent price drops on massive volume during thin trading hours designed to trigger stop losses and shake out weak hands, is about to be replaced by the sheer unstoppable force of genuine physical price discovery. When the paper market loses credibility and breaks down, price discovery moves to the physical market where supply is truly scarce and demand is truly urgent, and the repricing can be violent and discontinuous. The era of fake money funding a fake economy, of asset prices disconnected from underlying reality, of prosperity built on debt rather than productivity, has definitively ended. The violent repricing of reality is here, arriving not gradually but suddenly as these phase transitions often do. And for those holding physical silver outside the banking system, stored in your personal possession or in segregated allocated storage where you have specific bars with serial numbers assigned to you, history is about to be made. You will have a front row seat to one of the greatest wealth transfers in modern financial history as value flows from paper assets to physical assets. Prepare your portfolios thoughtfully and deliberately. Protect your wealth by holding assets that cannot be inflated away or confiscated. Steady your mind and emotions for the extreme volatility that is about to hit the financial markets. Thank you for watching Dark Macro and for your attention to this critical analysis. Stay vigilant, remain informed, secure your physical positions before the window closes, and I will see you in the WhatsApp group before the futures markets gap open tomorrow night. The time for preparation is nearly over. The time for action is now.